And welcome back. Here we go again with yet another video. Currently we are covering 3D modeling techniques, and we recently had a major lecture in video 18 where we went through the process of speed modeling this first iteration of a traditional Bialetti coffee maker. And now we're going through a series of shorter videos where we review a few important techniques that showed up in that big lecture, but that we have not discussed yet. And so today's topics are proportional editing, dissolving, and merging. Okay, so proportional editing. Proportional editing is your number one lifesaver when it comes to moving a lot of things together and sort of like reshaping or getting the rough shape and proportion of something in place. Like the name suggests, it allows you to edit things proportionally. And what that means is that, first of all, you need to be in edit mode to edit either vertices, edges, or faces. So right now I'm gonna press 2, for example, to go in edge selection mode. And usual reminder, in the bottom left corner you have the screencast keys. And then I'm gonna press O, like on, and that is gonna turn on the proportional editing. Now, the proportional editing lives up here in the 3D viewport in the middle section, and it is this icon that now has turned blue. If I press O again, it will deactivate. So as you can see, it has several options. Although smooth is the most commonly used, very rarely I have had to change it. But then there is another value, which is this one, which is the proportional size. So if I select something and I have the proportional editing activated, you might not see anything yet, but if you press a command like G, you will see that a circle appears. And you can kind of change the radius of this circle by scrolling with your mouse wheel. And that will either get bigger or smaller. And that is the radius of it that you see mentioned over here. Now, that radius is responsible for determining how much the other edges that are nearby will be affected by your changes. Okay? And so as you can see, there is a fallout from the center towards the edges where I am moving the selected one, right? I have only one selected. But then also the neighbors are moving. But the further they get away from the one that I have selected, the less they are affected. And this is all live, right? So I've started my G command, but I've not yet left-clicked or right-clicked away. So this is all a live preview. And if I scroll with my mouse wheel, I can expand my radius, and you will see that more and more edges are becoming to get affected by this change. Or I can make it way smaller, and then I'm localizing my change. Now, if you remember, when I was 3D modeling this part, I used the proportional editing to sort of nudge the beak of the coffee maker towards the center because it was too wide, and also it needed to match with this top part of the lid. So the proportional editing by itself is fairly straightforward. You can use it on a vertex, edge, or face with all sorts of commands like G, R, or scale. And the only trick that you really need to know is that there might be situations like the one we had here when we were working on it, where I wanted to move this area towards the inside, but I really didn't want to touch anything else. And so what you can do when you have situations like that one is that you can hide the parts of the mesh that you don't want to have affected and then unhide them when you are done. So in this case, I have merged all the parts of the mesh into one object because I have tidied up the scene. So right now I'm gonna press L like linked, and I'm gonna select this part that is the lead. I am gonna link, I'm gonna select with L also this part, and this part. And then let's suppose that I wanted to fix this part. What I would probably do is that I would deselect those parts that got selected right now that I didn't want to have selected. And so right now I have activated the X-rays, and then I'm going to use C to bring up my brush selection. And if you middle click with your mouse rather than left clicking with your mouse when you have a selection tool active, you are going to actually deselect things. So right now I am deselecting some faces that I don't want to have involved in my selection right now. And so now that I have selected the parts of the mesh that I would like to hide, I'm going to press H for hide. And now I have a clean line of approach to this mesh. And so what I'm going to do here is go to edge selection modes, select this edge, and I have O activated, proportional editing. And simply with G, I'm going to kind of nudge it so that it goes in a little bit. And then I'm going to continue playing with it using a vertex selection. And the way I go about it is that when I click G to enter the move tool, I use the scroll wheel to change the radius of the proportional editing depending on what I need. So to make this example very clear, suppose that I had made some major changes, like the one I did when I was actually 3D modeling this thing. So for example, I have moved things around considerably. When I press Alt H to unhide, you will see that the parts that you have edited proportionally have been moved, but those that were hidden have stayed in place, with the advantage that the connections that existed have not been broken. So right here, I've moved this part of the face, but it's connected just the same way as it was before. And of course, now it looks like a car ran this coffee maker over. So I'm going to Ctrl Z and go back with my changes. Okay, moving on, we are discussing the dissolve technique. So the dissolve technique allows you to select something, which could be like one edge or an entire edge loop. And then when you press X, the delete menu comes up and you are going to dissolve either the vertices, edges, or faces. Now the one I use most frequently are dissolve edges. And what dissolve edges does is that, differently from deleting edges, which would make that edge loop just disappear and sort of break the continuity of the surface, what the dissolve edge does is that it makes the edge disappear, but it also recalculates fundamentally the faces. It's like a merge operation that makes it so that this surface gets recreated using the two neighbors. And now we have all along where we had the edge loop, a clean set of faces that are just flat between this edge loop and this edge loop. And so two of the most common applications of this technique are when you have a situation like this, for example, where you have two triangles that need to become a quad. So you could select the diagonal edge, dissolve it, and now you have a clean quad. Or if you remember when I created this part of the coffee maker, I kind of really struggled to get this shape right. I kind of messed up the process a little bit. And so what I had to do was to sort of bring this section a little bit outwards, but that would cause some issues. And so what I went and did back then was that I selected the edges and sort of simplified everything so that the dissolve process would do most of the work for me in terms of sort of smoothing the curvature in a way that worked. And then later on, I sort of reintroduced an edge loop when I needed it. And so you could think of the dissolve edge action as the actual inverse of the Ctrl R operation, where you are adding an edge loop. With the dissolve edge, you are removing it. Okay, so now for the last part of this video, I'm going to demonstrate the merge operation, and I'm going to use a plane to do that first. So let's take this plane, go into edit mode, press 1 for vertex selection, and then I'm going to select 2 vertices, press M for merge, and this is pretty straightforward. If I press at center, they will find themselves merged at the center position, the average between the two of them. And of course, you could do this operation for as many vertices or edges or faces as you want. You're not limited to 2. What is important is that if you choose other operations like at last, the order in which you select things obviously matters. So I've selected this one first and this one last. So if I press M, merge, at last, all the vertices that I might have had selected end up being overlapped and merged to the last one I have selected. Now, one neat trick that I use all the time when I'm 3D modeling, especially with curvy things that need to have an organic feeling, and you saw me do this during the big lecture, was that I create a plane, I press A, and I make sure that I am in vertex selection mode, and then I press M at center, and now all the vertices have been snapped at the center. And so this might trick you into thinking that everything is gone. But if you press G and you move around, there is this one vertex that still exists. This one vertex that is the result of the merge operation. And now what I have fundamentally is an object that is just one vertex. And so you saw me take this approach when I was 3D modeling the handle. So I created for myself a clean single vertex. And from there, I pressed E to extrude it. And now I have an edge. And then again. And so that is how I ended up creating the curve. Then you saw me duplicating and transform into faces as I went about constructing the handle. Although it is important to make a distinction that these are edges that have been created by extruding a vertex. And then if I were to duplicate them, for example, select 2 of them and press F, I would start to have faces, okay? So it is important to not get confused about the fact that this is still very much polygonal modeling. You're working with edges, although the subdivision modifier makes them smooth and makes them look like curves. They are not what is technically called a curve. A curve, when we are referring to it in strictly technical terms, is a Bezier curve that we reviewed when we were discussing the evolution of 3D computer graphics, and we spoke about NURBS. This is an altogether different entity that we have not discussed yet, that we have not used yet, and that is not what you want to use for this approach. So don't get confused if you use this trick and create for yourself a curve like this one. This is a curve in, everyday language, but in technical language, this is not what we call a curve. These are edges that will become faces once you start to connect them with other edges. Okay, here I have moved momentarily to the second project file, the sprue modeling kit, to demonstrate the difference between dissolving and merging. So you might have a situation like this one where you have, for example, something that is divided along the mirroring axis. And then you have a topology that looks something like this, where you have a triangle that is structured in this way. And if it was in any other place, like say this one, you could go about it with a dissolve edge and it would just form a quad. However, if you were to dissolve this one, because it is not attached to anything else, the result that you would get would be this one, which is not what you want, because then when you flip over the other half, this vertex would be missing and you would not have the result that you were necessarily expecting. So the way to go about this is that you select the edge and you Ctrl R and add a vertex into it. And now you select this vertex and a vertex like this one or the other one, and then press M, merge at last. And now you have achieved that you have removed the diagonal. You now have a clean quad and you have effectively removed the edge without losing the quad. So that should be an illustration that dissolving and merging are not the same thing, and there are situations that require one approach and other situations that require a different approach. And so this wraps it up for this video, and I will see you in the next one where we will discuss how to visualize and fix normals. Because when you take this approach of starting from a vertex, then an edge, and then faces, sometimes you run into the issue of having inverted normals. And so we're going to take a look at what that means and how we can fix it.